Hey everyone, Sarah here. Rewind Justice brings you revenge stories that will blow your mind. If you're ready, hit subscribe and let's go.
The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke up at 4:52 a.m. Not because I was nervous. Not because I was dreading the drive to my parents' house in Naperville, Illinois, or the smell of my mother's sweet potato casserole, or the sound of my sister Renata's voice carrying across the open kitchen like she owned the air in every room she entered. I woke up because I had been waiting for this day for a very long time. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment on the third floor of a walk-up in Wicker Park. I opened my laptop and looked at the folder one more time. Not to add anything. I hadn't added anything in 6 weeks. The folder was complete. Had been complete since September, when Marcus Chen, my forensic accountant at Lakeview Financial Consulting on North Clark Street, had handed me the final summary and said, in the flat, factual tone of a man who had seen everything, "Vivian, this is $2.3 million. This is documented. Every transaction. Every account. Every forged signature. This is actionable." I had nodded. I had thanked him. I had driven home and put the printed copy in a manila folder. I labeled the folder the same thing I had labeled the digital file on my laptop 3 years earlier, the night I found the first discrepancy in my grandmother's bank statement while helping her reconcile her accounts at her kitchen table in Elmhurst. I called it evidence. I closed the laptop. I finished my coffee. I picked up the folder. And I drove to Naperville. My name is Vivian Chow. I am 31 years old. I am a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital Group, a mid-size investment advisory firm on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I have held that title for 4 years. Before that, I spent 3 years at a boutique accounting firm in Lincoln Park, where I learned, because the work required it, how to read financial statements the way a doctor reads an X-ray. Not just for what's there. For what's missing. My sister Renata is 35. She lives 12 minutes from our parents' house in a 4-bedroom colonial that she and her husband Derek purchased in 2019. Derek works in sales. Renata does not work. This has never been presented as a choice, or a lifestyle, or a personal decision. In our family, it has always been presented as the natural order of things, as evidence that Renata married correctly, lived correctly, prioritized correctly. As proof that she was the daughter who understood what mattered. I was the other one. You and your spreadsheets, my mother said to me once, at a birthday dinner at an Italian restaurant in Naperville when I was 26. She said it with a small, affectionate laugh, the kind that contains a needle. Always analyzing everything. You know, sometimes you just have to live. I smiled. I picked up my fork. I did not say, I am analyzing because I found something in Grandma's accounts that doesn't add up, and I am trying to understand it before I say anything to anyone, because in this family, the person who finds the problem is always the problem. I did not say that. Not then. Instead, I went home. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I typed a date in the file name. I started a spreadsheet. I called it evidence. The first discrepancy I found was $14,000. It appeared in October of 2021, in my grandmother Mylin's personal checking account at First Midwest Bank in Elmhurst. I noticed it because I was helping her prepare for a meeting with her estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Holloway at Holloway & Briggs, Estate Law, on York Road in Elmhurst, a woman who had managed my grandmother's affairs for 11 years and who, I would later learn, had been quietly concerned about the account activity for months but had not had enough documentation to raise a formal objection. The $14,000 appeared as a transfer. The destination account was labeled Family Support Fund. There was no such fund. I knew this because I had spent a summer during college helping my grandmother organize her financial documents. There was no family support fund. There had never been one. I mentioned it to Renata that same week, casually, over the phone. "Oh," Renata said. "Mom set that up. It's for emergencies. Grandma approved it." I asked if I could see the authorization documents. "Vivian," Renata said, and her voice shifted, the way it always shifted when I asked a question she didn't want to answer, into something patient and faintly condescending, like I was a child who had asked why the sky was blue for the 4th time that afternoon. "Why do you always have to make things so complicated? It's family money. It helps the family. You benefit from it too." I said okay. I got off the phone. I opened the spreadsheet. I added the $14,000. I started looking further back. What I found, over the next 37 months, was not complicated. It was, in fact, devastatingly simple. Between January 2018 and September 2024, 6 years and 9 months, my mother and my sister had been making systematic withdrawals from my grandmother Mylin's accounts. Not in large, obvious amounts. In amounts small enough to avoid automatic bank flags. $8,000 here. $12,500 there. A $22,000 loan in March of 2020, during the pandemic, when my grandmother was isolated and frightened and, as her medical records would later confirm, showing early signs of cognitive decline that no one in the family had formally acknowledged. A $47,000 transfer in August of 2021, labeled estate advance, for which there was no corresponding documentation in my grandmother's estate files. The total, when Marcus Chen completed his forensic accounting report in September 2024, was $2,374,000. $2,374,000. Withdrawn from the accounts of a woman who had spent 40 years running a dry cleaning business in Elmhurst with my late grandfather, who had saved every dollar with the specific intention of leaving her grandchildren a foundation, not a fortune, but a foundation. Enough to start. Enough to not have to start from nothing. I had started from nothing. Renata had started from $2.374 million. And she had called it the family money. I want to tell you about my grandmother. Mylin Chow was 79 years old. She was 4'11". She wore the same 3 cardigans on rotation, pale blue, cream, dusty rose, and she kept hard candies in a ceramic dish on her kitchen counter, and she smelled like White Shoulders perfume and dry cleaning solvent and something underneath both of those things that I could not name but that meant home in a way nothing else in my life ever had. She had been watching what was happening to her accounts for longer than I had. She told me this in October of 2023, on a Sunday afternoon in her kitchen in Elmhurst, when I had driven over to help her with her grocery list, and she had, without preamble, without drama, without any visible emotion, placed a folder on the kitchen table in front of me and said, "I think you should look at this." I looked at it. It was 2 years of her own handwritten records. Dates. Amounts. Notes in her precise, small handwriting. Renata called. Said it was for the house. I said okay. I don't know if I should have said okay. I looked up at her. "How long have you known?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She straightened the ceramic candy dish. She said, "I am old, Vivian. I am not stupid. I knew something was wrong when your mother stopped asking. When people stop asking, they have already decided." I drove home that night with her folder in my passenger seat and $2.3 million in documented theft sitting in the evidence file on my laptop, and I made a decision. I would not call a lawyer yet. I would not call the bank. I would not do anything that could be deflected, denied, reframed, or spun. I would wait until there was a moment when Renata was so certain she had already won that the reversal would land with maximum force. I would wait for a moment when everyone who had watched her dismiss me was present to see what I had been carrying. I would wait for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Naperville has always followed the same choreography. My mother, Linda, cooks for 3 days in advance. My father, Robert, sets the table with the good china and then retreats to his armchair and his football game and his role as the benevolent patriarch who doesn't involve himself in the women's business. Renata arrives first, 4 to 5 minutes early, because arriving first means owning the room before anyone else can claim a corner of it. She brings wine she didn't pay for and a salad no one asked for, and her husband Derek, who has the specific quality of a man who knows he is complicit in something he cannot name and has decided that not naming it is the same as not knowing it. And then there is Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol is my father's younger sister. She is 62. She lives alone in a house in Oak Park that she bought herself, mortgage-free, in 2009, after 23 years as a senior partner at Whitmore & Associates, a litigation firm on LaSalle Street in Chicago. She retired early. She tends a garden. She has always been, in our family's taxonomy, the difficult one, not because she is difficult, but because she asks questions, and in families where certain questions are not supposed to be asked, the asker becomes the difficulty. She had been watching Renata for 15 years. She told me once, over coffee at a diner on Lake Street in Oak Park, been waiting for someone else in the family to see what she saw. I was going to say something years ago, she said. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I wish I had. I had called her 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I had driven to Oak Park and sat at her kitchen table and opened the folder and showed her the numbers and watched her face go still and then stiller, the way a courtroom goes quiet before a verdict. She had looked up at me when I finished. What do you need me to do? She said. Just be there, I said. Be at the table. Watch. She nodded. She closed the folder carefully. She handed it back. I'll be there, she said. I arrived at my parents' house at 2:17 p.m. The table was set. The good china. My mother's sweet potato casserole was already out of the oven and resting on the counter, exactly as it had been every Thanksgiving of my life. The smell of it hit me at the door, brown sugar and cinnamon, and for a moment I was 10 years old and none of this had happened yet. Then Renata came around the corner from the kitchen with a glass of Pinot Grigio and a smile that was too wide by about 15%, the way her smiles always were when she was performing for the room, and she said, "Oh, you made it." Not hello. Not I'm glad you came. You made it. Like my attendance was a surprise. Like she had privately wagered I wouldn't show. I made it, I said. I set my bag down by the door. I did not take out the folder yet. I sat down at the table. There were 14 of us. My parents. Renata and Derek. My mother's sister, Aunt June, and her husband Tom. Their 2 adult children, my cousins Marcus and Lily. My father's brother, Uncle Bill, and his wife Sandra. Aunt Carol. My grandmother Mylin, who had driven herself from Elmhurst in her blue Honda and was seated at the far end of the table in the chair she had occupied at every Thanksgiving since I was a child, eating her dinner quietly and watching everything the way she always watched everything, with the patience of someone who has already done their calculations and is simply waiting for the rest of the table to catch up. The food came out. The table filled. My father said a brief grace. People ate. For the first 40 minutes, it was just dinner. And then someone, I think it was Aunt June, asking about my job, asking with genuine warmth, said, "Vivian, how is work? You're still at Meridian Capital." "Senior analyst," I said. "4th year." "That's wonderful," she said. Renata set down her fork. She had been waiting for an opening. I could see it. I had been watching her all afternoon, the way she angled herself toward the center of the table, the way she waited for the conversation to shift to me, the way she had been building toward something since I walked in the door. "Senior analyst," Renata said. She said it with a small smile. "The needle kind. That must keep you busy. I mean, it's not like you have a lot of other obligations." My father looked up from his plate. "She means," Renata continued, turning slightly toward the table, "that some of us have a lot more going on. Managing a household. The kids' schedules. Helping mom and dad." She paused. She let that sit. "Vivian's very focused on her career." "I contribute what I can," I said. "Right," Renata said. She picked up her wine glass. She set it down without drinking. "I just think it would be nice if the contributions were a little more visible. To the family. You know? Mom and dad aren't getting younger. The house needs things. There are expenses." She looked around the table, not at me, at everyone else, gathering witnesses. Some of us carry more of the weight than others. The table was quiet. My father cleared his throat. My mother looked at her casserole. Aunt Carol looked at me. And Renata, reading the room and finding it favorable, made the decision that would define the rest of her afternoon. She sat up a little straighter. She turned to face me directly. And in front of 14 people, my parents, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles and cousins and her own husband, she said, "She hasn't paid a single dollar into this family in years. That's just the truth. I don't know why nobody says it. Some of us show up, and some of us just freeload. I'm sorry, but that's what it is." Derek stared at his plate. My grandmother set down her fork. The table was completely silent. I looked at Renata. I looked at Aunt Carol. And then I reached into my bag. I had printed the summary report at 6 a.m. that morning on my home printer. Marcus Chen's report ran to 43 pages, account records, transaction logs, forensic annotations, cross-referenced bank statements dating back to January 2018. I had printed the full 43 pages and placed them in the manila folder. I had also printed a one-page executive summary, Marcus's summary, not mine, with his name and his firm's letterhead at the top and the total at the bottom, in a font large enough to read across a table. I placed the folder on the table. I placed the one-page summary on top, face up, so the total was visible. I said, "Would you like to read it, or should I?" Renata looked at the folder. Her smile did not disappear immediately. It took about 3 seconds. It went the way a fire goes when someone removes the oxygen, not all at once, but completely. "What is that?" she said. "This," I said, "is a forensic accounting report prepared by Marcus Chen, CPA, of Lakeview Financial Consulting on North Clark Street in Chicago. It documents every unauthorized withdrawal from Grandma's accounts between January 2018 and September 2024. I placed my hand flat on the folder. The total is $2,374,000. No one moved. "That's," Renata started. "Withdrawn," I said, "from Grandma's personal accounts and a family trust account that she never formally authorized the creation of. The withdrawals were made in amounts below federal reporting thresholds to avoid automatic bank flags. The authorization documents that exist, and several were produced, bear Grandma's signature on dates when Grandma was documented by her physician, Dr. Susan Park at Elmhurst Memorial Hospital, to have been experiencing early cognitive decline." I looked at my mother. My mother had not looked up from her plate. "Linda," said Aunt Carol. Her voice was quiet. Level. The voice of a woman who had cross-examined people in courtrooms for 23 years. "Look up." My mother looked up. "Mom," Renata said. Her voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was something rawer, not remorse. Fear. "Mom, she's misrepresenting." "Renata." My grandmother's voice came from the end of the table. The room went still in a different way. My grandmother was 79 years old and 4'11", and she was looking at Renata with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was the expression of a woman who had waited a very long time to say something and had finally decided that the time had come and that no amount of discomfort at a Thanksgiving table was going to stop her. "I knew," my grandmother said. "I want you to understand that. I am old. I am not stupid. I watched it happen. I let it happen because I believed, I told myself, that family takes care of family. That there was a reason. That you would have told me if you needed it that badly." Renata opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," my grandmother said. Renata closed her mouth. "I called Patricia Holloway on October 14th, my grandmother said. Patricia Holloway. The estate attorney on York Road in Elmhurst. The woman who had been quietly concerned for months. I asked her to amend my will. She told me she had been waiting for my call." My grandmother folded her hands on the table. "The amendment removes both of you," she looked at my mother, then at Renata, "from my estate. Entirely. It names Vivian as sole beneficiary. It also authorizes Patricia to cooperate fully with any forensic accounting investigation." My mother made a sound. Not a word. A sound. "I signed it on October 15th, my grandmother said. It's done." Derek stood up from the table. He sat back down. He looked at Renata. He looked at the folder. He picked up his wine glass and then put it back without drinking and then stood up again and walked to the kitchen and didn't come back for 4 minutes. When he came back, he sat down and didn't say anything for the rest of the evening. Renata was crying. Not quietly. The kind of crying that is also argument, also defense, also the last available form of aggression when all the other forms have been removed. "We needed it," she said. "The house, Derek's commissions were down, and we needed." "You needed $2 million, Aunt Carol said. "It wasn't like that." "What was it like?" Aunt Carol said. She was not raising her voice. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. "Explain it. You have the whole table here. Explain what it was like." Renata looked at my mother. My mother said nothing. "Mom," Renata said. "Tell them." "I can't," my mother started. She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her lips. She looked at my grandmother. "Mama, I'm..." "Linda," my grandmother said. "Don't." Silence. My cousin Lily, across the table, was looking at me with an expression that I would think about later, wide-eyed, a little stunned, and underneath the shock, something that looked like recognition. Her mother, Aunt June, reached over and put her hand over mine on the table and squeezed once. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked at Renata. I waited until she looked back at me. "I've been called a freeloader," I said. My voice was level. Not cold. Not hot. Just clear. "I've been called the absent one. The selfish one. The daughter who doesn't show up, doesn't contribute, doesn't care enough about the family to sacrifice anything." I picked up the one-page summary. "I named the file evidence," I said. "In October 2021. I have been adding to it for 37 months. Every transaction. Every date. Every account." I set it back down. The forensic accountant's fee was $3,800. That is the only money I have spent on this family in 3 years, because it was the only expenditure that was going to matter. Renata stared at me. "You have never been the one who carries this family," I said. "You have been the one who empties it. Those are not the same thing." I stood up. I said goodbye to my grandmother first. She was still seated at the end of the table. She looked small in her chair and absolutely certain in the way that only people who have made irreversible decisions can look. I walked to her and crouched down so we were at eye level, and she took my face in both hands the way she used to when I was very young, and she said, "You were always the careful one. I should have told you sooner that I noticed." "You told me when it mattered," I said. She held my face for one more moment. Then she let go. I said goodbye to Aunt Carol at the door. She had her coat on. She had put it on the same moment I stood up, with the efficiency of a woman who knows exactly when a room is finished. "You did that right," she said. She squeezed my arm. "You did that exactly right." I said goodbye to Aunt June, who hugged me too long and cried a little, and to my cousin Lily, who said quietly, "I always knew something was wrong. I didn't know how to say it," and to my Uncle Bill, who shook my hand with both of his, and to my cousin Marcus, who said nothing but looked at me with the kind of respect you extend to someone who has just done something you didn't know you needed to see. I did not say goodbye to Renata. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I picked up the manila folder. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door and I opened it, and the November air in Naperville hit me, cold and clean, 34 degrees, the kind of cold that clarifies. I walked to my car. I got in. I sat for a moment in the parking pad behind my parents' house, looking at the back of the house where I had grown up, at the kitchen window where the light was still on, where I could see my mother's silhouette at the counter and Renata sitting at the table with her head down. I thought about the folder on my laptop. The one I had been building for 37 months. The one I had named evidence at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in October 2021, in my kitchen in Wicker Park, alone, because I had found something that didn't add up, and I had known, with the specific certainty of someone who reads financial statements for a living, that it was going to get worse before anyone acknowledged it was wrong. Turned out I was right. I started the car. I drove home. Patricia Holloway called me the following Monday. "The will amendment is filed and binding," she said. "I want you to know, I should have acted on my concerns sooner. I had documentation that I hadn't yet formalized. Your grandmother gave me the authorization I needed." A pause. "Marcus Chen's report has been forwarded to the appropriate parties. Given the scope and the documentation, I would expect formal proceedings within 60 days. I thanked her. I set the phone down. I opened my laptop. I looked at the folder labeled evidence. I looked at it for a long moment. 37 months of Sunday mornings and late Tuesday nights, and the specific loneliness of knowing something that you cannot yet prove in a way that matters, of carrying documentation the way other people carry resentment, because documentation lasts and resentment only damages the one who holds it. I deleted the folder. Not because it was no longer needed. Patricia had the copies. Marcus had the copies. The appropriate parties had the copies. I deleted it because I didn't need it anymore. The folder was finished. Its purpose was complete. I opened a new folder. I didn't name it anything. 3 weeks later, I signed a lease on a new apartment. 2 bedrooms, on the 6th floor of a building in Evanston, 2 blocks from the lakefront. I could see the water from the kitchen window. I moved in on a Saturday in December with my friend Priya, who brought coffee and packing tape in her truck, and we carried boxes up to the 6th floor and put them down in the right rooms, and when the last box was in and the door was closed, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the lake, gray and cold, half frozen at the edges, December in Chicago, and I felt something I had not felt in 37 months. Not triumph. Not vindication. Not even relief, exactly. Just space. The sensation of having put something down that you have been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. My grandmother called that evening. "Are you in the new place?" she said. "I'm in," I said. "Good," she said. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the television in her living room in Elmhurst. "Vivian. The cost of everything you did, the accountant, the time, the years of keeping that folder. I know what that costs. Not just money." "I know," I said. "It was yours to pay," she said. "It shouldn't have been. But you paid it." I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at the gray lake and the last pale light going out over the water. "My bill is paid in full," I said. She laughed, small and quiet and warm. The laugh I had been hearing my whole life. "Yes," she said. "It is." I have not spoken to my mother since Thanksgiving. I have not spoken to Renata. I received one text from Renata, 18 days after Thanksgiving. It said, "Can we talk? Please. I know what I did. I just want to explain." I read it. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about 37 months of Sundays. I thought about the number 2,374,000. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting in her folder. I don't know if I should have said okay. I wrote back one sentence. "This isn't forever. It's until you understand what you actually did, not what you needed, not what you were afraid of, but what you chose. That's a different conversation. When you're ready to have it, I'll know." I have not heard back. The door has a lock now. I installed it myself. It opens from the inside. That has always been the point. If you made it to the end of this story, type free in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, if some part of this felt less like fiction and more like a language you already know, subscribe. Only if this genuinely connects with you. That's the only reason I'm here.